we can start with Berçeste. Berçeste, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Before we start, I want to ask one personal question, but your name is Turkish name, I think.
Selam, nicesiniz?
So, you are Turkish, but I couldn't find nothing just about your Turkish experiment or nothing in Turkey. But you are
So,
Turkish.
yeah, I moved to Canada
So,
after studying there in Turkey. After high school, I moved to Canada to study, and I stayed.
okay, perfect. So, we can start. Do you have any presentation?
I don't. I'm going to speak through some of my notes.
Perfect, yeah, start.
All right. Well, I'm really great to be here. Thank you for having me. Just a little bit of background. I lead a UX team at Shopify, and I'm a UX manager there. I've led teams in the past of multidisciplinary backgrounds, so UX developer to senior product designers to product designers, content strategists on my team, and UX researchers. Today, I'm going to give a little bit of background on so 3 pillars of a successful discovery phase. Because I strongly believe that a successful product is going to be successful only if you determine the problem statement really well. And that is the foundation of that is to understand users' needs. And through the discovery phase of the project, there are a lot of times in my career I've seen that this is just overlooked and it's skipped through the line kind of thing, and people don't necessarily pay enough attention to it. And that's why I want to speak about that. So in terms of 3 problems that I'm going to walk you through, one, I'm going to talk about how to get to know who you're designing for, so the research part. In order to get a successful discovery phase done, establishing goals is really important. So I'm going to speak about how to establish those goals and what does success mean as a team. So defining that. Number 3 is really outlining the value proposition and understanding the big picture. And these are the 3 things that tie to a successful discovery phase for a digital product. So when we think about beyond the functional specification of something, the real value of discovery phase is that it moves us beyond the limits of a functional specification. So it provides some more context, which in turn encourages the teams to be more creative in their approach to solving the problems that is essential for the business, but at the same time, users' needs, right? As UX researchers, UX designers, we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, whatever we're creating and building, we want to make an impact on users' lives. So, what is that value really that they're going to get out of this product? A specification that defines the constraints. What are the constraints that, as a designer, I'm working through? So the discovery phase empowers and informs users and stakeholders. So number 1, getting to know who you're designing for. How do you run a UX research that's successful for the business and also for the project? Ask any UXer what the number 1 aim for discovery phase is. They will tell you that it's understanding the user. Although I think this is somewhat downplays the other criteria that I believe are equally important, they do have a point. So because an organization's understanding of user is often the weakest of the four areas before a discovery phase. So what I mean by that is senior management can usually talk eloquently about goals they're offering and even the broader marketplace. However, when it comes down to the user, they are often less informed, and simply because they don't have the contact with users daily. So, however, what I will say is any UX user research needs to consist of two parts. One is to carry out the user research itself, and the second is to visualize what you have learned. So all stakeholders have the same user requirements in mind. As a UXer, this is our goal out of the discovery phase. So set those, visualize, help the rest of the team understand what we're working towards, and set those goals within a visual language where they can understand those user requirements. Traditionally, this research has been shown as personas. I've seen that over and over. My personal opinion is these focus on the wrong information about the users, and your focus as a UXer should need to be on the tasks and the questions and touch points, the objections users might have. You need to think about their goals and their pain points, right? Not their demographics necessarily. That does inform us at a level. However, it doesn't deep dive enough in order to define those user requirements. One of the best frameworks for extracting the right information and communicating back to stakeholders is through customer journey mapping. And that's what I recommend my team to do. Oftentimes, it doesn't even have to be in the discovery phase, right? Like throughout the phases of the agile methodology or whatever methodology your team is running in, customer journey mapping can help understand these points that I just discussed with you, the pain points, the goals of the users, the tasks, the questions, touch points, even how they're feeling when interacting with their product. So as a UXer, you want to know about these things a lot more, deep dive into these. Number two of getting a successful discovery phase done is really about establishing goals and define success. As a UX researcher, you want to, or a UX designer who's running the research. By the way, you don't have to be a researcher to run a UX research. And you can be trained well enough in order to understand the complexity of running what research technique is the right for that project. And it may vary because there's tons of research techniques, qualitative, quantitative, depending on your need. Going back to establishing goals for the project, one could argue that it is even more critical to a product, digital product, to define its goals and what success looks like when it's to understand users' needs. And although in truth, the two are interlinked. So without clear goals and definition of success, the project will be rudderless and vulnerable to scope creep. And all of us probably experience this in projects that this happens quite often. However, most importantly, without clear goals, stakeholders will have no way of assessing whether or not the project has been successful. So they're interlinked. Of course, the ultimate way of determining success or a project is whether it generates a return on investment. So however, what form that return will take can vary, but it is also essential to define that upfront. And for example, it can cause a conflict in a project. If one stakeholder is expecting a financial return in form of more sales or leads, while the others are focused on improving the experience or engagement, it should be interlinked and it should be understood as it's interlinked. So you would also need to consider how you're going to measure these success criteria, right? as a UXer, you're all about quantitative metrics as well. How do you define success? For example, how are you going to track and benchmark this product against what? Too often, senior management set an arbitrary definition of success with no consideration of how feasible it is. And within this discovery phase, you find out about these feasibility points. Project is like at this step, really it's about defining the key performance indicators. And those are the metrics that I was talking about. Once your discovery phase has clearly defined these objectives and user needs, then it's time to consider the value proposition, which ties to my third pillar, to a successful discovery phase. So the third pillar, outlining the value proposition and understand the big picture, is about something that's also overlooked within the discovery phase. Stakeholders are so focused on objectives and UX professionals on the user needs that nobody stops to ask the value the service provides the consumer or the user, and whether that matches their actual needs. So this is the time to evaluate that. The focus of your value proposition varies slightly depending on the nature of the product. So suppose your discovery phase is looking at a mobile app, it's slightly different than a website, right? In that case, the application, the value proposition will be about the app itself, the environment that the app is used in. In either case, the discovery phase should define two aspects of the value proposition. One is the benefits it provides. The other is the features that it allows to deliver for those benefits. So without these, it is really impossible to communicate to users why they should pay attention to the service you're building or the designs that you're working on. Make sure that the project that you work on has benefits defined clearly and the features that you're focusing on delivering. And yeah, like no digital service is existing in a vacuum. So any discovery phase must consider a big picture. And what I mean by that is really about understanding the broader context beyond the project itself that you're working on, is also tying back to a successful discovery phase. And to deep dive more onto that is about, are you considering the internal politics of how things are run in a company, right? This can become an issue if you do not consider them. For example, things like technical limitations or compliance issues that may be dependent on your project. A review of existing related services. So if there's an existing version of the service you're working on or an app, does it make sense to review this before proceeding with the redesign, right? Are you engaging the right people in the project, right? Like outside of the project stakeholders, are there other people who are impacted with your work? So oftentimes that's not looked at until later down the project, where a project can derail if there's a conflict. So these are a couple of things that what understanding the broader context involves. And how much time and effort you put into understanding the context within the discovery phase will vary according to the project, but failing to consider this at all will lead to issues further down the line when things are hard to change. And finally, I will close off with some of the tips for better discovery phase from my view that I think you'll appreciate, that I learned through the years. They're really simple steps and tips. Make your discovery phase proportional. So don't think that, because you work for a company that's huge versus, small, don't think that you have to run a immense amount of research on it before you can start designing. And this is a false thing to believe in. In my opinion, you can even talk to one person, and that can tell a lot of things. You may not have the budget to do so, right? So there are a lot of considerations in this. And however, a well-run discovery phase should be proportional to the overall budget of the project. So a well-run discovery phase should be proportional around the budget of the project as well. So if your project has small budget, then it could consist of a single meeting with a critical stakeholder. Or if the project runs into millions, that's great. But how are you going to use that budget, right? Like effectively. It is essential to prepare more thoroughly in that scenario where you can involve weeks to do research. And that could be even months to work through, right? So include, and number two is really like include the whole team in the discovery phase. Don't think that this only belongs to a UXer. The most significant mistake that I've seen is that discovery phase is failure is to make sure when the entire team is not involved. You're only going through the benefit from the expertise of everybody if they all know the background of the project. They need to know is not an approach that we should be adopting on digital projects. Next tip is make sure you include in-person time with users. So big part of, I know in our digital world, it needs remote, it could be Zoom call, right? A big part of every discovery phase should be meeting with them, either remote or either in person. And this is something as part of involve as many team members as possible in this process. If they cannot be there in person, make sure they watch at least some of the recorded interviews. Do not rely on the stats or personas to give you an understanding of the user. They don't enable you to connect with the user's needs. Hearing them out from their mouth is essential. And it actually also builds a lot more empathy towards the users when you hear them say, oh, I can't get through this task because, they haven't enabled XYZ feature. So it's really important to hear them out from their mouth, first person. And the other two tip is really very simple steps. Talk to all stakeholders. It's all about communication, and it's invaluable to identifying potential problems that could derail a project further down the line. So one of the most prominent examples of this is unhappy stakeholders who swoop into a build halfway through and express dissatisfaction for the project growth. And we can avoid this if we speak to all stakeholders during the discovery phase, right? Like let them be involved, hear them out. They will feel involved and not ignored. So it's all about that. It's all about communication. And lastly, and I'll close off with this, make the discovery a separate project with clear deliverables. This is really important because people pay enough attention to the project itself, number one reason. The other reason is that if you try to add a discovery phase onto the start of a project, it can feel like a delay. And this often comes as a conversation between product and the UXer who wants to do a discovery phase. So even if it's a small project, separate that from the project so that people don't feel like they're being blocked by this phase of the project, right? That is particularly true if you're an outside agency, for example. A discovery project is an opportunity for a new client to try to find a working relationship with you for a minimum investment. So if it has defined deliverables, it would be possible for the client to go to another supplier at the end of the discovery phase if they were unhappy and not be any worse off. So I often recommend combining the discovery phase with some initial prototyping as well, as a prototype is a tangible deliverable that the client can appreciate and embrace. And that's all. I'm up for questions and any other feedback you have.
Thanks, Berçeste. Thanks a lot. And you have really good experience in your career and improving yourself day to day. Actually, your speech, it was really good. I haven't any question, I think. So, thanks for your speech.